My name is Jeffrey Schonberg, and I'm a lecturer at San Francisco State. I used to work in the homeless field, and I was a community organizer, and I was running a program for 74 formerly homeless people here in Berkeley, and I was just interested in photography. And with a woman who I worked with, we got a grant to teach. I got a grant to use photography as the photographic process as part of my community organizing, and so I taught taking pictures. I had a dark room that donated time to us, and I just started getting interested in photography, and so I started researching different programs, and so I wanted to be a documentary photographer. That was my intention originally when I went back to get my master's, and then I met a professor at State who had just met a community of homeless heroin addicts, and when I was researching different programs, he asked if I could come down and help them out with services. Can I help them locate resources for for referrals, for housing, for addiction services, et cetera, et cetera. And I went down and I started taking pictures, and then on my own I started hanging out with this group and bringing them photographs. And he became one of my advisor. He was my anthropology advisor while I was at State. And so I did it on my own. So I'm sort of I'm a self-learned visual anthropologist. I started reading the literature, and I was also doing photojournalism classes because stylistically I was interested in that type of photography. And then the education part was the organizing part, to use it to some sort of social good or end, to use it to educate people, blah blah blah. And so I was just doing it on my own. And then I had the opportunity to teach on the East Coast, and I created an ethnographic photography class, having just read the research on my own. And after that, I decided I wanted to teach and continue along that path. But when I went and did my PhD, I wasn't doing anything visual. Actually, to the contrary, because I'd been so involved in the visual part of anthropology on my own, my committee, which I went back to do my PhD after co-authoring a book, and they basically said, we don't want you to do anything visual. We want you to become a medical anthropologist, a traditional medical anthropologist. And then, because you have created and gained so much knowledge on your own of the visual anthropology sector, then you can do that. But and I did bring in someone over at this Professor Stanley Brandis from Berkeley, who understands photography and the visual. But to the contrary, they didn't want me to do visual anthropology at all. Well, not that they didn't want me to do visual anthropology, they didn't want me to be studying visual anthropology while I was a graduate student. And I went back to grad school when I had a 4-year-old and a 2-week-old. My first day of grad school, my youngest was 2 weeks old, and I was 38 years old. So it was a very different experience. But anyway.
So for you, what's the purpose of doing anthropology with images or photography?
It's a combination of things. One, it's just a different way of learning. It's a different way of expressing anthropological knowledge. It addresses different ideas, different experiences, different emotions. It's a way of communicating that is just, that has its own language than the written text. I believe actually in the importance of the written text, but I'm much more attuned, I think, to the visual. Well, I wouldn't say I'm attuned to it. I just find it to be interesting. I'm also attracted to it. I enjoy doing the visual. I'm attracted to both the process as well as the outcome. I love looking at photographs, and I get very moved by it. And I love engaging other people with photographs, and sitting down and talking about it and what emerges from sort of the dialogues that emerge from images, and film too. But I find for me, photography itself is a, because, and I know other authors have written about this, because of its limits. We're limited to a single image or a story, and therefore it requires us to sort of project into that sort of negative space these meanings. And I find that to be really important and part of that dialogic process. And it's a way in which we can communicate that, I think, is very different from both text as well as film, which provides you with so much more information. And of course that makes the visual, the photograph much more, sort of more dangerous because, am I okay? Well, yeah. It makes it more dangerous because we are projecting more into it that might not actually have been part of the moment of the experience itself, but yet as a space of dialogue, I think, you know, that is really, you know, that is fairly impressive. And so for me, so it is almost in its vagaries that provide it with its intensity, but also the aesthetics of it. I mean, the textures. I photograph black and white, although I'm looking at color now too. The textures that we get, and the legacy, and it allows us to think back upon sort of the history and the legacy of what it means to create lives and experience, and sort of the sociality that arises from the image, from both from both our intimate experiences with images, as well as the way images circulate, and how those circulations shape us and who we are, and sort of that idea of sort of the agency of images themselves. And so I find that really fascinating. And again, it's also something that I'm attracted to. I mean, I love it. I mean, they're beautiful, right? You look at a picture and you're just, you know, and you can be wowed by it, both the aesthetic of it as well as the emotion that can arise from it. It's, you know, it's a very intensive experience.
So can you tell us a bit about this class you created, the ethnographic
photography class? So that is basically, and I'm going to be teaching it actually, even though the class is designated as anthropology photography, it's really an opportunity for students to go do field work with a camera that involves learning social theory, visual theory, you know, so theories around power, you know, how, you know, the role of power in sort of shaping people's lives, how the visual plays into that participates in that process, and then having students go out and take pictures. And then it becomes more of, you know, and it allows them to both be in the field, of course, with a camera, and understand the difference between doing field work without a camera and with a camera. They also have to take field notes, and so they're going to be, you know, having to kind of weigh that the experience of representing visually as well as representing textually, thinking both visually while in the field as well as thinking textually while in the field, sort of filtering that through sort of this history of social theory and this history of mechanisms of power. And finally, the idea of how we present that material, you know, what it means to how do we show it and how we show it, you know, whether it's through layout, through different, you know, through different layouts, through different different processes like giving talks or shows. And so the idea is we're going to take that little gallery space and we're going to create something with it, and then have the students themselves mediate between their, you know, fieldwork experience, what they're representing from that fieldwork experience, and finally what they're then going to project to an audience, and whether that's an audience that they're imagining is someone who's going to be intimately alone reading their stuff, like one would do with a book, or someone in which they're or an audience in which they're engaging, you know, they're engaging or mediating that process, sort of in that live space. And so, excuse me. So that's the idea of the class. It's a lot of fun because you know, everyone who does, not everyone, I'd say 90% of the people go into the field take pictures somehow, whether it's with their iPhone, whether their phones, whether they want to be photographers with a camera. And so it really is just trying to, you know, sort of recognize the sophistication of that process and realize that it's just not, you know, it's just not something that one should take for granted. And then, like I said, you know, it's also fun. It's fun to look at each other's pictures. It's fun to critique each other's work. It's fun to try and understand, what we're trying, what our attempts are at representation, and then what sort of emerges from the actual process. I just think it's a great learning experience.